We had a group join us here a few weeks ago on a Friday night from a local church. This happens pretty often. It's actually something I love about Bethel is we're regularly welcoming guests, individuals and groups from local high schools, other faith groups and organizations. This particular group met with me for 30, 45 minutes and then stayed for Kabbalat Shabbat and Mariv. They wanted to learn about Judaism, about Jewish practice, about the rabbinate, about Bethel, and they wanted our community to know that their community is thinking of and praying for us. They asked a number of thoughtful questions, and I really enjoyed our conversation. One of the questions they came with stumped me. They asked, why does anti-Semitism exist? It's a good question. We've noticed people seem to hate you guys. Why is that? My answer was, I think and hope, a respectful, you're right, and I don't know. Certainly anti-Semitism has always existed. The Jews have been persecuted, killed, kicked out of nearly everywhere they've lived and congregated. So this isn't new. It's ancient and somehow entrenched in our world. My personal experience of anti-Semitism spans only about 31 years, and I want to focus mostly on the last 6 months or so, a little more, as we're seeing an increase in anti-Semitic language, rhetoric, and actions around the world. The anti-Semitism I'm seeing and feeling and noticing, particularly this year, feels like whatever we do is wrong or not enough. If we say or share or write something in support of Israeli soldiers or civilians, how could we not think of the suffering of Palestinians? If we say or share or write something in support of Palestinian children who are hungry, who are suffering, it's not enough. It's too late. Jews who are trying to gather to pray are arriving to see their synagogues defaced. Jews who are trying to walk to class are held up, delayed, threatened, yelled at, are seen as some kind of enemy. Jews are seen as a representation of that which is bad or wrong in the world. We've become scapegoats. It's a concept that originates in our parsha today. We read that Aaron, the priest, as part of what became Yom Kippur practice or ritual, brought 2 goats. One became an offering to God, and the other, all of Israel's sins, iniquities, missteps, issues, problems, errors was put on this goat. V'hitvada alav et kol avonot b'nei Yisrael v'et kol pish'ehem lechol chatotam. Aaron laid his hands upon the goat and confessed all the iniquities and transgressions of the Israelites, whatever their sins, putting them on this goat. That goat came to be known as an scapegoat and then a scapegoat as it was sent out into the wilderness. Now we can argue about whether or not that was fair to the goat, but at least it was an institution. It was a focused way for people to deal with their sins, their mistakes, their problems, their issues. Because Aaron, God, the ancient Israelites realized that this cannot go unchecked. We can't just blame anyone or everyone, a group or a whole people, for everything we've done wrong or everything we see that is wrong in the world. I should tell you early on in this sermon, I guess, that, and maybe it's obvious, I don't actually have an answer for why anti-Semitism exists. All I have is my feelings, and all I can speak to is my own experience. I've been wearing a kippah full-time for almost a decade. And when I tell the Olive preschoolers that, they always ask, even in the shower and when you sleep? And I say, okay, almost full-time. All the way through rabbinical school and a little before then, also for a year in 10th grade when I was on my USY regional board. And there are a few reasons that I wear it. One has to do with the fact that I love seeing Jews, seeing other Jews out and about. Ilana will tell you, because I think it embarrasses her a little bit, But we even made friends on the plane back from Ohio this past week because I saw a couple with a kippah and a headband and a skirt get on our plane. Sure enough, Aaron and Tehila live right around the corner from us. I'm hoping to have them over for a meal soon. Anyway, I love that interaction. Another thing I love is when a young kid sees me out in public and points or looks at their parents and says, as if saying, hey, I know what that is. Seeing themselves represented in how I walk down the street. Wearing a kippah each day gives me a feeling of community, of meaning in my religious practice, and it gives me a physical thing or a visual way to express spiritual ideas and ideals. I've really enjoyed and gotten a lot out of this practice. And that's why I've been struggling so much recently, because I went through a phase recently of covering it, sometimes taking it off, other times wearing a hat like a cap or a beanie. In the last 6 months or so, I've felt unsafe in a new way. Now, mostly not physically unsafe. Thank God I haven't been threatened or hit or harmed. But looking Jewish feels like it might be an invitation to discuss whatever issues a person might have with Israel, with the Israeli government, with war, with injustice or perceived injustice all over the world. And that's not fair to me either. So in some ways, I've not directly experienced anti-Semitism, but in others, I've been feeling the effects of and rabbiing through some of the worst anti-Semitism in my lifetime. Anti-Semitism that's happening in the form of expecting Jews in Minneapolis to answer for decisions of the Israeli government. Anti-Semitism in the form of people calling for a one-state solution in which there's a Palestine and no Israel. Anti-Semitism in the form of calling Jews genocidal murderers or calling for a worldwide anti-Jew uprising. Anti-Semitism is happening on Instagram and TikTok and on college campuses, and it's being given the time of day and air to breathe by media and leaders and politicians instead of being shut down or called out. It's one thing to be uncomfortable, right? It's important to me to name that people are allowed to say things that make us uncomfortable, and even things that we disagree with. Criticizing the Israeli government or the war or their policies, saying things like Palestinian people deserve safety and have the right to self-determination. These are conversations that at times can be difficult and they feel fraught, but we need to be having them. And those are not the conversations that we should be trying to shut down. But obviously there's more going on than simply legitimate policy debate. There's real anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish rhetoric, words, and actions. And it's as frightening as it is angering. It's also really hard to know how to respond. How can we possibly respond when Jews are being vilified, demonized, and being called murderers? Personally, I've noticed that my responses to this anti-Semitism have changed as time goes on, even week to week, situation to situation, and that's okay. Much of what I'm trying to do here, much of what I want to do here, is encourage us all to give ourselves grace, patience, and love. Many of us might be having the kippah conversation, either with ourselves or our children, our students, or our family members. And that conversation looks different in each household. Some of us have I Stand With Israel signs on our lawns. Maybe we're wearing dog tags or Magen David, Star of David chains around our necks. And that's a legitimate response to anti-Semitism and a common one. Some of us are not. We're hesitant to let our kids or our students wear their Israel hats to school, or we're worried about putting that sign up in our window. And that's also a legitimate response to anti-Semitism, and it's a common one. There's no one right way to do this. As I was saying, at some points throughout this winter, I felt I needed to wear a hat, even when it wasn't so cold outside. And today, for me, that's changed. My friend and teacher, Rabbi David Wolkenfeld, recently wrote a piece about why he put an Israeli flag in his window, and it really resonated with me. I'll share a chunk of it with you. Rabbi Wolkenfeld wrote, "I've developed an aversion to flags and anthems and other trappings of nationalism, but we have a small flag displayed in the window of our front door. Here are some reasons why I'm glad it's still there. 1. Flying a flag is a form of political speech protected by the Bill of Rights. One of America's superpowers is the ability of neighbors to live side by side, flying the flags of their ancestral homelands or of foreign countries whose struggles they support, without importing bitter and violent struggles to our streets. Let's fill our streets with flags of 100 countries and export our ability to live next door to one another in peace. 2. My cousins, students, teachers, colleagues, and friends living in Israel are frightened and anxious and grieving. The flag reminds me of my love for them, and if any of them should come and visit, they should know that their fear and grief and hopes for peace are not absent from my mind. 3. If there are anti-Semites looking to capitalize on hostility to Israel in order to target Jews, I don't want them to skip over my home. I don't want them to skip over my home is what led me back to my practice of wearing a kippah in public. To me, this is an acknowledgement that I am part of Am Yisrael, a part of the Jewish community, that even, perhaps especially in these difficult times, I recognize and celebrate those parts of my identity. Maybe I celebrate them quietly, but I celebrate them. Dr. Deborah Lipstadt is the U.S. Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism, and she uses language of pulling versus pushing. Anti-Semites push us towards a certain identity or a way of relating to Judaism. But, Dr. Lipstadt writes, the goal is that we should respond to anti-Semitism with an even more energetic pull toward our tradition and all its manifestations. What does that mean? That no matter how we respond to anti-Semitism around us, whether outwardly and loudly, or quietly and internally, our response cannot be to separate ourselves from the community or to abandon Judaism and Jewish practice. Our response to anti-Semitism absolutely needs to be to lean on each other and to lean into Jewish life and Jewish community. Chad touched on this last night, and I think said it really beautifully when he said to you, Aviva, that there's a lot of work to do. Looking at the world, there's a lot of work to do, but that you won't be alone as you do it. And so we need to ask ourselves, not what shades of blue and white am I going to wear to work today, though maybe that's part of it, and it's great if it is, but how can I or we embrace our Jewish identity today? Maybe it's doing some Jewish learning. Maybe it's taking on a practice of lighting candles every Friday night or making Havdalah each week. Maybe it's making a point to host more Shabbat meals or sign up to read Torah. Maybe it's starting to work out at the JCC. I hope it's attending the communal programs for Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, and Yom HaAtzmaut that are coming up soon. Maybe it's experimenting with wearing a kippah. I don't know, but I do look forward to hearing your ideas and to navigating this together. Finding meaningful ways to say in your face to people out there who want us to be ashamed of who we are, even if we say it in our homes or in our heads. I don't know why anti-Semitism exists. It's on the list of questions that keep me up at night. What I do know about anti-Semitism is that it can divide us. It has the potential to make us feel isolated and to question who we are and what we stand for. And so it's important that our response is to do the opposite, to double down and to embrace Jewish tradition. This week, I hope we can find a new way to connect to Jewish practice, or perhaps to rediscover one that used to be meaningful. I hope we can find grace and compassion and love for ourselves as we navigate a world that is just unrelenting. I hope we can lean on each other and lean into our Jewish lives. May we continue to respond to hatred with love and to division with unity. Shabbat Shalom. We'll continue with Musaf, beginning on page 155.